Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Signal or Noise. Charlie Bilello here, and with me, as always, Peter Mallouk. Peter, this is a topic I've been wanting to discuss for a while. I'm always writing about it, always posting things on X about it, and so I think we have to talk about it. How to make housing affordable again. To me, this is the number one issue facing America, and particularly the younger generation. You talk to anyone under the age of, let's say, 35, this is what they're talking about. And so first, I just want to give the backdrop, how we got here, where we are in terms of affordability and the housing market. So how do we get here? Well, it's pretty simple. Home prices have far outpaced wages. So that creates an affordability crisis. So over the last 10 years, we've seen home prices in the US rise over 90%, more than double the increase in average hourly wages. And if we look at home prices historically, Peter, compared to inflation, for a long time, for pretty much the history of the United States, they pretty closely tracked inflation. And that makes a lot of sense. It should be intuitive because a house should cost what the materials cost to build it. It should cost what the workers are compensated who are working on the house. And that's it. Right. And it should be based on people's wages, which is a part of inflation as well. All of that changed with the housing bubble in the 2000s when it became all of a sudden an investment like never before because supposedly it only goes up in value. We had this huge increase in prices. Then we had a crash. And now we're actually at a higher level in terms of real appreciation. So adjusting for inflation than back then. We're annualizing here in terms of nominal prices 8.8% per year so far this decade. That would be a record if that continues. And the real home price appreciation, we've never seen anything like it, 4.6% above the rate of inflation. And so this is where we get, Peter. This is the chart that really tells the whole story. The income needed to afford the median home for sale in the US, you need about 124,000 in terms of family income. But what's the actual family income in the US? The median family income, 79,000. So this is what I call the affordability gap, and it's 57%. We've never seen anything like it. It's far, far higher than the last housing bubble. And if we look at it basically on a percentage of income basis, it's untenable. 48% of your income you would need to afford the median priced home for sale. And I don't know what when you're in discussions with people, what you advise, but some people say 25, some people say 30. You don't really want to go much above that, but needless to say, 48% is not a good situation. It's going to leave pretty much nothing else for you to save, to invest, to spend on a vacation or any type of emergency. Everything is going to housing, right? So this is clearly a crisis, clearly the most unaffordable housing market in history. And a lot of people are talking this chart really went viral on X over the past few weeks. The percentage of 30-year-olds who are both married and a homeowner from 1950 to today, it's over 50% back then. Today, it's below 15% at an all-time low. And really, it's delayed the American dream for a whole younger generation of homeowners. We have a record high in terms of the median age of the first-time home buyer, 38 years old, and the percentage of first-time home buyers as a percentage of all home buyers also at a record low, 24%. So before we talk about the potential solutions, what do you make of the current state of the housing market? Do you think that it needs to be addressed as an issue that's facing a lot of people? Do you think it's overblown? What's your take on where the housing market is today and what the younger generation is confronting here?
I think it's an absolute, complete, total crisis that has implications far beyond just housing prices and completely self-induced by a completely and utterly incompetent Congress, President, and Federal Reserve. And this basically happened out of COVID. If you look at a couple of your charts, you just see this huge spike happen after COVID. What happened? We have basically pretty stable economy. Interest rates were low and stable. Inflation was pretty normal and stable. And during COVID, the Federal Reserve and Congress basically said, what do we do in crises when the stock market's going down and people aren't buying houses and cars and washers and dryers. We give everybody stimulus money and we lower interest rates. Well, we needed to do that after 9/11 to get people to stop cocooning. We needed to do it after 8/09 to get people to have confidence to spend money again. But with COVID, we did not need to do it. People were not inside because they didn't want to spend money. They were inside because they thought they were going to die. It's that simple. And as soon as they knew they weren't going to die, they were going to go spend their money because they hadn't been spending any money. It just been sitting there. But now they came out with interest rates lower and a bunch of stimulus money. And like, look, if everybody's got more money and interest rates are lower, what happens? Housing prices go up. And so anyone that owned assets, whether it was stocks in a 401k, or a business or real estate, house, whatever, all of those things rocketed in value. But the cost of everything in the world rocketed in value too, because everyone was all this money, the stimulus money, trillions of dollars thrown in the system. Now going to Disney World costs more. Going on a Delta flight costs more. Buying a Diet Coke, going to Chipotle costs more. And so for people that owned assets like a home, congratulations, your net worth went up. Obviously, for most creative planning clients, this works out just fine. Inflation helps people that own assets. But for the overwhelming majority of Americans, they're going to work, making a certain amount of money, and coming home, all of a sudden their rent went up 30%. All their food went up 30%. Everything they want to do went up 30%. It's crushing. So you have all these people in these homes with a lot of wealth and low rates. They're not going to get out of their homes because they can't switch from that 2.5% mortgage to a 6% mortgage. And you have a whole generation that can't buy a home because they're inflated in value and interest rates are higher. And because of it, they're delaying other types of things like getting married, starting a family that have huge implications for the mental well-being of the country, socioeconomic divide of the country. This is a total train wreck. It's very frustrating to see because it was so avoidable. And I think when we're reading economic books 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're going to be pointing to this period of time as a great example of total government incompetence impacting an entire generation. How's that for my thought? I have no thoughts on this, Charlie, of course.
Yeah.
I'm just
Tell me
really
how you
passionate
really
about
feel.
this because I think it has implications for a lot of people. I think it's extremely problematic. And you've got this generation coming up. It's the first generation in American history where it's worse for them than every generation before it. And it's all because of a couple of completely incompetent decisions that were avoidable.
Yeah, and it's not in their imagination. A lot of people are dismissing this, and people talk about the early 1980s interest rates were very high. It's like the boomer kind of retort is we had to suffer as well. But if you look at the actual data and you look at what home prices were back then, even though interest rates were very high, they were way more affordable than where they are today. So let's talk about the actual solutions. And this is going to dig into a lot of the stuff you talked about because in order to solve a crisis, you have to know what created the crisis and to either stop that or at least prevent it from not happening again. So I just listed a bunch of things here in terms of my own thinking, and you can add to this as well. But I want to go through each of these one by one, Peter, and get your take on this. Number one for me would be the money supply. And you alluded to this. We printed 40% more of the money supply in 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, and basically said, we'll worry about it later. Let's just print money. We borrowed, obviously, a lot of money, trillions of dollars as well. We sent that out, as you said, to people. But what can we do in the future to make sure that doesn't happen again? There's going to be another crisis, and my fear is they're going to have the same response. They're going to want to print a lot of money again, and that will only exacerbate this situation. So, should we have a limit on the money supply growth where we at least tie it to GDP or something else that makes sense rather than just out of thin air, we can create 40, 50% more money in a few years?
Of course. I mean, all these ideas are great ideas. Unfortunately, as you know, probably not going to happen. Stop printing money and throwing it at people. Stop dropping interest rates to zero. Stop providing guarantees that inflate prices. I mean, these are great ideas. This is the exact opposite, though, of what the federal government has done, what Federal Reserve and Congress has done over and over and over again. But those three things alone would solve 60, 70% of the problems. I like the rest of your ideas too. I think very out of the box in terms of creating more supply as well. right? You create more supply by releasing federal and state land, not national parks, nothing like that. But the
Yep.
government owns an enormous amount of land that has nothing to do with that no one's enjoying. Let's release that. I love the idea of killing a lot of the tax breaks. I know our listeners aren't going to like that, but guess
Yep.
what? If you own a $3 million home, we shouldn't be subsidizing you. Poor people should not be subsidizing you. People in the lower middle class should not be subsidizing you. And it inflates the value of those prices. And of course, you can incentivize building. The government's tried that a few different ways. But the last point is the one that I like the most: tax foreign buyers, tax corporate investors. Blackstone does not need to own every residential home in America. They can go buy the rest of the world. Let's not let them do that, or let's create a tax impediment for them to do that, so that we all don't become renters, right? Of this class of people that are investing in companies like Blackstone. We need to have a little bit of control around this and make residential homes be purchased by residential buyers. Just that alone helps solve part of the supply
At
and demand
least,
equation.
right, at least until homes become affordable and you could pick a metric based on multiple of
Right.
income, any of those metrics that I showed you earlier. I don't think you need that additional source of demand driving up prices at this point in time. And my proposal would be to use that tax revenue that you generate from corporate investors, foreign buyers, to lower property taxes for everyone else to get people behind it. So I think in the interim, that would help. But getting back to the Fed, Peter, because we know they were very instrumental in this. And it's interesting, there's a lot of pressure on the Fed today to cut interest rates. There's people saying they should cut 300 basis points, they should cut this. And some people might suggest they should go back to 0%, but there's no real talk about, well, what that would do to the housing market that's already in a difficult, as we're talking about, the most unaffordable level in history. And there's also no talk about reducing the Fed's power in terms of, should they be allowed to buy mortgage-backed securities? They bought trillions of these things, Peter, starting in 2020, right around the COVID time. Home prices back then were already at all-time highs. They showed no signs of weakening, and they essentially threw fuel in the fire by buying trillions in mortgage bonds, driving the interest rate below 3%. And yes, that was great for anybody that was an existing homeowner and who's able to get a mortgage below 3%. But essentially, they created now what is a frozen housing market in doing that, because then they stopped buying it and they're letting those mortgages roll off. But I don't see any rational reason, Peter, why the Fed should be in the business of buying mortgage-backed securities.
Completely agree. And I think that, yes, while housing prices were at all-time highs, it was going to fix itself because you had a larger generation aging out of homes with a smaller generation coming in for the first time in American history. So we had natural supply and demand that was going to solve itself, along with builders building. Like you said, the fuel to the fire created a generational problem that's going to be a long, long time to solve it.
It's just fascinating because Congress, you never hear them talking about restricting the power in terms of that. They could act tomorrow and say, you can no longer do that. I don't hear it. Fannie and Freddie is a big one, Peter. And obviously, in the financial crisis, we had to bail them out. And you would have thought that would have led to perhaps them becoming less powerful. Nope, they've only gotten more and more powerful now. They control about 70% of the mortgage market in the United States. And to me, this is not a good development. You don't want them actually coming into this market and dominating it to such an extent, because by subsidizing it, by offering mortgages, let's say at lower than a market rate, by requiring lower standards in terms of down payments, right? They're driving up the price of that asset. And it would be painful. I agree, no doubt. It would be an adjustment. But if we're concerned about affordability, why should the federal government be so heavily involved in the housing market? Why shouldn't a loan on a house be based on what the buyer can actually afford? And there should be someone on the hook, not the US taxpayer, but a bank or a lender who will actually suffer if that loan defaults. Is that a crazy idea?
And I mean, I understand why these organizations started, right? We wanted to make the American dream more accessible, but they actually have the opposite impact today. And that's what's changed about it. Now they've made it harder for people to get a home because their policies are inflationary. And so you couple it with all the other government policies, it's helped drive out this new generation. So I understand it was well intentioned. I understand there was a period in the world where it worked, but unfortunately, with all the money in the system and rates where they are, it's not helpful anymore.
It's like most government programs. So when they were created, there was a need or deemed a need. Fannie Mae was created during the Great Depression, right? What were home prices doing during the Great Depression? They were collapsing, right? So the government felt like they needed to step in, stabilize the market, or there was going to be a collapse. But after that, they didn't disband it after prices recovered. They only grew in terms of their dominance. And in the 1970s, they added Freddie Mac as well. That's a complicated issue, no doubt about it. But I don't think that we should be letting them take more and more share in the market. Eventually, Peter, what that's going to lead to is another crisis, and we're going to have to bail them out once again. That's not going to be good for anybody. But in terms of the supply side, Peter, and this is obviously no one wants to do it in their backyard, right? In terms of changing zoning laws or reforming land use, changing commercial to residential. And one of my ideas is incentivize home builders, give them a period of time here where they don't pay any corporate tax rate on new construction to incentivize new building. Do you think any of these will gain traction in terms of increasing supply? Because we know there's at least a shortage. There's different estimates, but at least a few million homes in terms of a shortage versus household formation over the last 15 years is way more than what's been built. So it is a supply issue as well.
Yeah, I'm not hopeful. Are you hopeful here?
No, not exactly. Not
Yeah.
exactly. No, nobody wants to do it in their backyard, and I can understand that. You don't want competition and all the rest of it, but if any one of these, Peter, I think the broader point is they don't all have to be enacted, but if you picked any one of these at the margin, that would be helpful. And if you did a few of them, especially with the Federal Reserve and controlling money printing and limiting the powers of Fannie and Freddie, these are all things that are, I think, pretty doable. That would substantially help this problem. But let's talk about why this hasn't happened and what's the pushback. Of course, there's vested interest. And this is the part that nobody really talks about, Peter. Everyone will tell you they want homes to be more affordable. They're in favor of that. They want to do that. But when it comes down to it, their constituents have a lot of vested interests that want to keep prices high, that actually benefit from having a housing bubble, which, if you look at those initial charts, that's where we are again. So let's talk through some of that, starting with, of course, the people that are already in the market. Like you mentioned, your clients, they've benefited tremendously by home prices outpacing wages. So why should they want, other than thinking ahead for future generations, why should they want home prices to normalize?
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem, and this chart's or graph is very interesting in that it shows how this stuff happens. One of the reasons that Congress and the president, the Federal Reserve, flood systems with money and give people tax breaks and let the deficit rise, even though someday the deficit will cause an enormous crisis, is because they get all the benefit, and someone a generation or two away is going to bear the brunt of it. And that's the theme here of your graph. Existing homeowners, fine. You lower rates and give everybody money. Home goes up. I have more net worth. Banks, mortgage lenders, this is wonderful because I loan money. I loan 300,000 on a $800,000 house. Now the home's worth 1.2 million, less defaults. Real estate agent, I'd rather sell $1 million home than $800,000 home. Local governments, huge winners, right? We're all excited about our home value went up. What changed? Well, all we do is pay more property taxes. We're going to the same home. Local governments now collecting all this money to do whatever they want. Fannie and Freddie now become every institution wants more power. They're doing more deals. They're getting more power. And of course, institutional investors and private equity high-fiving and doing fireball shots, right? Asset prices have gone way, way, way up. They're making more money than ever. And the Federal Reserve and the policymakers, they're the ones that are to blame for all of this. But instead of dealing with a bunch of upset people going through a tough period of time a little bit longer, they give everybody the free pass. They give everybody the drugs. Someone else is going to have to deal with the consequences of it down the road. This is the problem with why we have such a big ongoing deficit, why the national debt is so significant. Is if you make it worse today, you actually come across as a hero. No one, people are busy. They don't understand all this stuff. They don't have time to look at it. We're worried about everything else in our lives. Someday someone's going to pay a price.
Yeah, just digging into the Fed here for a second in terms of they clearly were a big part of creating this problem. So they have a huge vested interest in preventing it from bursting, right? Because then people are going to be pointing fingers. Look, you created this thing and now it's bursting. I mean, they did come back in, right? In terms of their answer, in terms of the Fed or the federal government, is always not reevaluate my policy, just do more of the existing. So after the last housing bubble, we saw prices nationally go down about 25%. In many areas, they went down even more. If you look at Florida and areas that were experiencing enormous appreciation, they were down over 50%. And the Fed's answer in 2008, Peter, wasn't, okay, homes are affordable again. Well, that's good. Let's keep them there. Their answer was, no, 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 we have to prop this thing back up. So they held interest rates at 0% for 7 years. So, well, the economy's expanding again, unemployment's way down, and they keep interest rates at 0%. They do many rounds of QE during that time, buying a lot of mortgage bonds. So their answer seems to be, if there's going to be a decline, let's say, in home prices in the next few years, I'm not sure that they're going to be happy with that. I'm sure they're going to try to do something, or people will be calling on them, start buying mortgage bonds again, cut interest rates to 0%, prop this thing back up, and instead of letting supply and demand take hold.
Yeah, I mean that's let's see how let's see how they do.
What about this generational divide? Because that's a big one, right?
I mean
The
I think
older
we've got a big
generation
yeah
versus the younger generation.
yeah
The older generation loves this, right? And pretty much anybody who bought before this, the post COVID spike, is very happy with this. If you had debt, right, the best thing when you have debt is to inflate your way out of it. And you've talked a lot about this in the Connect events that we do. It was a huge boon to anybody who had a more existing mortgage debt. The asset value exploded higher. You're now being paid more. You're able to service that debt. Those people don't want to see a correction in home prices. Like,
right.
let the younger generation continue to have their problems because I'm still doing fine. What do you make about that divide?
I think a lot of people aren't having the conscious thoughts around it as you describe, but I think we have a real generational divide now, and it's not going to get solved until the older generation starts to pass on, and the younger generation inherits it. The problem is with longevity. The younger generation is going to have a very long life with this very big divide. You could say, well, the answer is lower interest rates, which makes homes more affordable for this next generation, but lower interest rates drive up home prices. There's just too much money sloshing around the system, and it's going to take a long, long time to solve this. I can see it getting solved by an external event that creates a housing crash or an asset price crash,
Hmm.
as we saw with 0809 or 9/11 or the tech bubble or something like that. We might have a very severe bear market for other reasons that
Yep.
starts to impact pricing across the board.
A rise in unemployment,
Yeah,
unrelated,
that's right.
that isn't papered over like we did in 2020.
Hmm.
So, what's your best guess, Peter, absent that scenario? What happens in the housing market? Very few things that we suggested are likely to be
Right.
implemented. So, if that doesn't happen, is it just a question of time? Like, if things can still normalize, because ultimately there's very little demand right now because of that lack of affordability, and you're starting to see supply slowly rise as that lock-in effect starts to ease. Do you think maybe it just means 10 years of close to flat prices, and that's the way we'll get out of this thing?
I think it's just a lot of time. I think a lot of people have wanted to move, like upgrade their home or whatever, but they can't go from their 2.5% mortgage to the 5.5 or 6.5% mortgage. But I think as time goes on, you'll see more and more of those people move, even if interest rates come down just a little bit, and we'll start to see it soften. But this is going to be a long unwind.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final point on this, because people often ask me, they say, "Well, Charlie, well, why don't you want to have an asset bubble in houses? Isn't that a good thing for a lot of people? Why is it a bad thing to have these policies that encourage really prices deviating from incomes?" And my answer to that is very simple. Housing is a place you live in. It's an expense, but it doesn't really build national wealth. It's not an exportable good, Peter, in the same way that what Nvidia and Google and Apple and Amazon are doing. It's very much different than that. And so you really want that good to be more than anything else affordable so that you're not crowding out other areas of the economy in terms of saving and investing in productive areas of the economy that could be exported. So it's yes, it's great for the person in the short run who owns that. Now they're forgetting, which they often exclude, the higher property taxes that they're paying, the higher maintenance, the higher insurance costs, forgetting all of that. Yes, it's great for them. But as a country, it's not a good policy to have the housing market frozen, to have these unaffordable levels where people can't move and they don't have the mobility that they used to have. For all of those reasons, Peter, I just don't believe it's good policy to be actively promoting this. Like if it happened on its own and it's just a bubble, okay, fine, just a sentiment-driven bubble. But we know based on all of these policies, it didn't just happen on its own. It happened because of these errors of commission. Does that make sense in
It
terms of how
does.
I'm thinking about
Yeah,
it?
I agree.
Okay. All right. Peter, that was a fun one today. We could probably do a full
Yeah.
hour on this. Maybe we will at some point. But again, if you're in any of these areas, Peter and I are going around doing these Connect 25 events. We have these great other speakers on AI, happiness as well. So join us. We have one next week in Omaha. So if you're in that area, join us. In September, we're in Denver. In October, we're in Atlanta, and in Florida, Tampa, and Miami, Fort Lauderdale. So reach out to us. I'll have a link in the show notes, creativeplanning.com/regional connect. Hope to see you there. Thanks everyone for joining us today on Signal or Noise. If you're watching this on YouTube, take a quick moment, hit that subscribe button for all the latest content from us, and we'll see you next time on Signal or Noise.